Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we are going to be going over some things that we should probably clean up before we move into React proper. And that is going to be a little talk on cookies and sessions, and a preview of single page applications or SPAs, as you lovingly see. Where's my hand? Over here somewhere. Um, Basically, this is just to kind of round out the non-front end types of things that we'll be doing, and to help you along with storing data between pages and all that fun stuff. So without further ado, hey, look at that, we've got some slides today. So this week is basically just going to be, again, hopefully not too impactful from the things that you already know. Obviously, we're getting kind of a smorgasbord of so many different technologies in this class that it's probably overwhelming. But these kinds of things we're going to be talking about today span all of the technologies, and they're all pretty similar in how they are accessed. So it's basically just a syntax thing rather than a conceptual thing, which is kind of nice because you don't have to, you know, relearn the entire concept of what a cookie is for Rails versus Flask versus PHP versus .NET. It's all the same thing, really. It's just how you create it. So we're going to talk data management, basically. And the idea here is that we want to retain information between pages for your user. And we can do this for a multitude of reasons. I'm sure you all have browsed the internet at one point or another in your lifespan so far. But basically, when you visit a page, a lot of times you will get a small cookie set. Maybe it's your preference for dark mode versus light mode. Maybe it's the last access date or something like that, right? And then that is used to tailor your user experience. You can take that to the extreme, and people are tracking what you click, where your mouse is hovering, and all kinds of crazy things for marketing or advertising purposes. And, these are all perfectly valid uses of these information bits that you can store. Some of them are a little bit more obtrusive or annoying in terms of, obviously your browsing habits, but the idea is that we are storing user information. Now, the idea is that we have multiple ways to do this. And what we've talked about so far in terms of the class, we haven't really talked cookies and sessions, but we have looked at database storage a touch with MySQL, with SQLite in terms of Ruby on Rails. That is all persistent data, right? So if I insert something into a database, it's there forever until I clean it up, I delete something, it's updated, right? That's the whole CRUD application type of system. Cookies and sessions are kind of transient temporary data. Think of it almost like your flash memory or something like that, your RAM in a way, where it's there for a set amount of time. This is not RAM, obviously. It's a bit of an example. But the idea and why we want this is that servers are typically stateless, if you remember. And what that means is that every single time that I visit a website, it is a brand new session, right? It's a brand new request. The web server doesn't know who I am. I'm just a new hit for it to basically serve content to, right? So it's stateless. Now, cookies and sessions are basically two sides of the same coin for introducing state into an application. Now, a cookie, these have been around for a long time. And then if any of you are old enough to remember the time when you might manually delete cookies off of your hard drive because you thought it would save you some hard drive space. Um, I used to do that a long time ago, and it actually did add up a touch. Now, it's not worth it, obviously, but a cookie is basically just a small little text file. Depending on your browser, it might encrypt them, but in theory, you can just access them on your hard drive. And what these are tiny little files that store some piece of data, and they are time limited, meaning that they will eventually expire based on what the developer has set. And this is just some simple key value pair of data. Think of it like a dictionary or a hash map, where if I am a web developer and I am creating a website and I want to store, does this user like dark mode or light mode? right? And hopefully you can extrapolate that this kind of a choice would be which CSS class we present to the user, right? Hopefully. um, but basically the idea is that I would say, okay, I see that based on this user's cookie, their key in the dictionary for preference is dark mode. So let's render everything solarized, or let's render everything with a black background and green text because you're cool. Or maybe they like light mode. Maybe they're in a a very bright environment where they need the white background and they need to be able to see things. I would just look up user preference in my cookie and then I would get that value back. Okay. And again, this is something which will also expire as well. So when I visit a website and I click the little moon icon or the sun icon to change my mode preference, a cookie that would then be stored on my computer, and I as the developer, sorry, I as the user would click that, and then maybe me as the developer would say, okay, let's set a cookie expire in 1 month. And then once 1 month rolls by, this cookie will be automatically deleted and it's just gone. And then we would have to set a new one once it expires. That's the idea of a cookie, a little transient thing that you can use to help keep user information. Um, we'll talk security in a moment. Session, oops, didn't want to do that. Sessions are a little bit more robust. These are, they tend to be more tied to the secured side of things. These are going to be server-side connections where we are again introducing state, we are sharing data, we are keeping things active, but ideally it is only active while the user is browsing the site. Now you could store session information server-side so that, I visit your site, I start interacting with it, you're building up information about me, then I close down my computer for the day and I come back tomorrow. You can store the session ID and resume that session later on, but we're going to kind of put that aside for now. Basically, the idea is that I go to, say, your homepage, and then your server starts up a session. Everything that I want to track while this user is active on my website, I can share between pages. So the example would be you go to log in, maybe to your bank or to something where it's behind a login, for instance. Okay, I start a session once that user logs in. Then I can carry their username or at least their access token from page to page to page to page without asking them to log in again because we've already authenticated them. Maybe they fill out a form of some information. I want to update my profile. Okay, here's my new username, here's my new profile picture, here's my bio. And then I just carry that little avatar from page to page to page to page. The idea basically is that the server is facilitating this. This is not a local key value pair stored on your computer. What is stored is the key for the session. So basically, there's a very fine difference here that we'll talk about in a bit. Other things here too. So in most frameworks that are out there, most languages, you have to start the session manually. For instance, in PHP, which you'll see in the demo coming up in another video, I have you, well, not you, but I call session start, and that kicks off the session. PHP doesn't automatically do that for you. In Rails, you get a session by default. So you basically get a variable called session, which exists, and you can play with that if you want. Something that I'll have you all look into separately. But the idea, again, basically the differences here. Small transient text file stored your computer, something generated on the server side. It's basically what's going on here. And just to give you a little bit more of an example, so this is a preview into one of the demos where we play with cookies and sessions in PHP. I've got a web page here. All right, so this is just an Ubuntu page. Here's my Apache bit. And if we go over in our developer tools to application, there's a section called storage. We've got a whole bunch of things here, but basically one of them is cookies. Cookies and sessions are tied to domains. So this is one of the security bits that I should talk about. Cookies and sessions are tied to a domain. One of the bigger security threats out there are cross-site scripting attacks, where another website tries to take over your cookie or tries to hijack your session. And this is something which can happen if you don't really practice safe web development or safe browsing habits. Key here, I guess maybe let's touch on this for a second. Don't ever store your session ID in a cookie. Don't ever store sensitive information in a cookie because again, these are accessible by anybody. Let me give you an example here. So this page, right, I've got no cookies here for this domain. I've got an example which sets a cookie. So first time the cookie doesn't exist, it's going to set the cookie. I see username Eric pop up here. Then I'm going to refresh. The cookie has been read in by my PHP script. Life is good. Key here is that this information is not encrypted. It's publicly available to anybody to look at. So if I'm browsing the public computer, this cookie would just exist there, right? I go to the library, log in. Maybe it's not an authenticated computer, it's open for everybody. Well, there's going to be a whole laundry list of cookies that are probably set for everybody that's browsed to whichever website. And again, this is just publicly available. Now, if I were to do a session, we got a session example as well. All right, so I'm going to actually, again, I've got a demo video in this this week's series, but you see this PHP session ID also gets stored, and it's an encrypted, or it's at least an encoded key where the browser is using it to authenticate the session to the server. You know, I am allowed to use the session ID. This is something that could be hijacked by somebody in the middle. So effectively what I'm trying to get at, if you are doing anything sensitive, encrypt it, put it behind HTTPS. Don't ever store anything sensitive in a cookie because anybody can read it at any given time. And be very careful with your session information as well. Again, the easy rule is just put everything behind HTTPS, and that will be blanket protection. And you can get a lot deeper into session protection as well. It's a better topic for like a cybersecurity class, honestly. But basically, the idea here is these are things that are viewable in your dev tools. And one other point, I guess, before we move on here, when I'm in my session, I'm not seeing any of the session variables pop up. So one of my session variables that I have in this example is an animal type. And we've got a little madlibs type of generator here where leftovers is a session variable, animal is a session variable. You're not seeing that pop up in the dev tools, right? So just some things to kind of keep in mind. All right, so sorry for the little cut there. One of the other kind of points just for client versus server side to really hammer this point home. When I say client side, that's something happening on your computer. Okay, that is your browser on your machine, whether it's Brave or Firefox or Chrome or Safari or whatever you use. This is a client side thing, right? It's your computer. This is the cookie type of thing. It's a directive from the web programming language, PHP, Flask, Rails, whatever you use. Generate a cookie, information based on what's currently happening in the browser, save it to your computer. That's client side. Server side, something generated by the web server. This is by Apache or Nginx or IIS, Flask, whichever web server you are using. The session ID that's generated will be tied to that server. Ideally, it's not accessible by others. But the key here, not, pun not intended because I'm got key here. Basically, this should in theory be a bit more secure. There are attacks for getting by this though. Just a couple of security points to really hammer home. I've actually got a link here to Essential PHP Security, so another O'Reilly book that you can use, and this one's actually just open access, I believe. But it kind of outlines some of the different security concerns which are pretty common on the web these days. First and foremost, again, I mentioned this earlier, don't store your session ID in the cookie, as well as passwords, usernames, anything that is sensitive. Cookies are easily readable. But the session ID thing, that might be a little bit less obvious, right? Because we can just see it in our dev tools. The point basically is that when I say transient, I mean that they're not going to last until the browser gives it up. If it's stored in a cookie, it's basically there until the cookie expires on your computer and it's readable again by anybody. So just to give you a kind of a couple of different views of the security thing. Here we have a server, we have a target server, and we have a victim in the middle. And what's happening here is that the victim, their computer, basically this user here, is going to visit a site by clicking or they're going to go to the site and they're going to click a link. And this link is going to have a session ID kind of embedded in the URL. What's happening is that effectively what's going on, an attacker has gotten in the loop here. They have injected a session ID, or they are getting the session ID from the victim in this case. The attacker then has access to the session ID and can actually browse as this user. Multiple ways that you can do this. I'm glossing over the very fine details here, but effectively what's going on is that we are hijacking somebody's session. And again, I'd really encourage you to check out this link here. It's the same one that I've got here. Okay, so another one then, what we've got going on is just follow the numbers is kind of the easiest way to read this figure. We have an attacker, we have a victim, and we have a few different web servers here. So the attacker goes to a site. We get a OK response, right? So a 200 response. We also get a session ID. The session ID, interestingly, is set in a cookie, which I told you not to do. Okay. The attacker has access to the root server. So that's one thing I should mention here too. The attacker has access to the server. All right. They update the main website with a link to the session ID that they want to inject. All right, so we have attacker updates this thing. Then we have our poor victim here. Maybe they're just somebody browsing to the site to buy something or log in or what have you. They go here. Okay, they get a response back. This response has this embedded link. And to you, the user, you're probably not even going to notice it, right? You just see, okay, I'm going to hover over here. Down at the bottom, it's going to go away really quickly, but maybe we get a little preview, maybe we don't. Maybe I could have this be a link to a Rickroll, but it's actually a link to a honeypot or something like that. Okay, the victim clicks that, then this gets put in, and then we possibly get redirected to this other site. Again, not really going too deep into how these attacks happen. I just really want to stress that it is possible to inject sessions, to hijack sessions, and to really take over somebody's browsing session. This is wildly out of date now, but there is a Firefox extension called Firesheep, which was used to basically hijack sessions on public Wi-Fis. I'll see if I can find the video because it's really interesting. It's also cute to see how old. I mean, the video is at least 10 years old, if not more. So you have ancient Amazon and ancient MSN and all that fun stuff. But basically what happened is that you launch this extension and you can just watch everybody's session on the current network pop up in your browser. So I could say double click on victim one and all of a sudden, hey, I'm logged in as them to Hotmail or to eBay or to Amazon. A lot of these things have been fixed. Obviously, it's a pretty big security flaw, but it's, again, still possible to hijack sessions and hijack machines. I've got a few links here if you want some extra detail on cookies and sessions, but that's probably good for now. Now, what we're going to be doing for some work this week is I'll have you play with cookies and sessions in Rails and in either PHP or Flask. Nothing too stressful, hopefully, but should be fun. Anyway, I'll leave you with that. I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.